Harmony Week today. My name is Sifam Tango, and I'm the facilitator of today's event. I'm the Senior Solicitor at Your Story Disability Legal Support, which is a free national service supporting people to share their stories with the Disability Royal Commission and connect people with support services. Before we begin today, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the land of the Bidjigal and Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. I acknowledge that sovereignty over this land was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Due to unforeseen circumstances, our guest speaker, Margarita Coppolino, was unable to join us today. Blanca Ramirez is also from National Ethnic Disability Alliance and has kindly agreed to share her insights with us. Thank you so much, Blanca.
Thank you, Blanca.
Blanca has a deep sense of commitment to service and access to justice for all. As a child of undocumented Mexican immigrants and having lived experience with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, Blanca is acutely aware how various issues and policies intersect within the migrant community. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Sociology and a Juris Doctor Graduate Diploma of Legal Practice. Her experience includes volunteering at legal clinics, supporting marginalized communities, touring the Middle East with the US Navy, working at the National Disability Insurance Agency as a Freedom of Information Officer, and a lawyer with the Administrative Appeals Tribunal branch. Blanca previously worked on NIDA's Embrace Mental Health project and is currently the Senior Research and Policy Officer. After our discussion with Blanca, there will be time for Q&A. I'd just like to cover some housekeeping before we get started. This webinar is being recorded as well as live streamed to the Your Story Disability Legal Support Facebook page. Auslan and captions are available. To turn on captions, go to the toolbar at the bottom of your screen and click on the button labeled CC Live Transcript. Please post in the chat if you're having any tech issues. To ask questions on Zoom, please use the Q&A function for those questions, so not in the chat. You can ask a question anonymously if you wish to. On Facebook, please post your questions in comments. If we don't get to your question, we'll respond after the session by email. If this webinar raises any concerns for you, free counseling is available. Please call Blue Knot on 1-800-421-468. So today's webinar is in recognition of Harmony Week, an annual celebration of Australia's cultural diversity. Harmony Week also coincides with the United Nations International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which was on Monday. The Disability Royal Commission has identified multicultural communities as a priority group, recognizing that it's important to hear directly from people with disability from those communities about their own experiences. At Your Story, we also recognize this and the barriers that people from multicultural communities may face when engaging with the Royal Commission. We want to encourage and support those communities to be part of the national conversation in ways that work for them so that they can give their views about the changes and improvements they would like to see coming out of the Disability Royal Commission. Blanca, what do these days of recognition mean to you?
Well, Harmony Day is a day to reflect and to celebrate diversity, and it's aimed to foster inclusiveness, respect, and ideas that people from all different cultures can make valuable contributions, no matter what background or intersectional lens you are from. But as you mentioned, Harmony Day is also the UN International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which that day focuses more on racism. The Australian Human Rights Commission has the campaign of Racism, It Starts With Me, meaning that we all need to help build an Australia where everybody belongs, and which is the theme of this year, which is We Belong. So this week, I think we should also look at the intersectional lens of people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds and the racism they experience. I think what's important for both of these days, which is on the same day, is to discuss diversity of inclusiveness but to also discuss the realities of racism in order to build an Australia where everybody can belong.
Absolutely. I think that's such an important message, and we all play a part in making belonging for everyone a reality. Leading on from there, what are some of the unique challenges faced by people with disability from diverse and cultural and linguistic backgrounds?
Sure. I guess I'd just like to start that a lot of these issues are unique to multicultural backgrounds and potentially can be compounded by also having lived experience with disability or having or being a person with disabilities. Just to bear in mind, when I name some of these issues, they do get compounded by the different intersectional lens that people from multicultural backgrounds can have. One of the big barriers and challenges that people face are exclusion and discrimination. They negatively impact people from multicultural backgrounds, and that creates a barrier to inclusion and belonging. There's also a lack of access to information and communication barriers. And in particular, there's a lack of information about rights, entitlements, services, and supports that are often not easily accessible in an appropriate format. And for some, language is a common barrier to accessing services and supports. There's also with different culture communities, there's a different understanding of what disability is, and that can raise issues of stigma that people with disability might have within their own culture and communities. There's also the Migration Act in Australia has this really high bar for the health requirement, which discriminates against people with disability who may be seen as a health burden. And that translates into refugees and migrants, for example, not being able to access health and other services. And as an example of that, there are migrants and refugees and asylum seekers who become permanent residents will have to wait things like 4 years to before they can access most income support payments. And they would also have to be a permanent resident for 10 years before they're eligible for things like the disability support pension and age pension. And these are barriers that Australian citizens do not have to face. And that also kind of feeds into, and I mean, I can go on for barriers for a while.
I'm sure, yeah.
And there's in particular, for migrants and refugees who come to Australia, there might be a lack of trust in government services or confidence in public services, depending on what their home country is. They may not have that same type of system in their home country and may not necessarily understand what that means when they move to Australia.
Absolutely, and you've raised some of the more common barriers our clients from multicultural backgrounds talk to us about. The stigma within cultures and communities is definitely a significant one, and hopefully one that might be addressed through and from the work of the Royal Commission, because if people from all cultures know that it's safe to share their experiences and stories, and that you're demystifying the legal and government frameworks around that, it's not only about it being safe for their communities, but society as a whole might then be more open to hearing about the experiences of people with disability and responding in more inclusive and supportive ways. So I think a lot of the work that we do is to advise people about the safe and confidential ways for them to share their stories. So Blanca, what would you highlight to community workers and others about the insights people from multicultural backgrounds can bring to the Disability Royal Commission?
I think people from multicultural backgrounds bring a unique perspective and unique issues surrounding violence, abuse, and neglect that others may not necessarily have. They have experience of racism that are also compounded, as I mentioned before, by that intersectional of different types of marginalized communities. They can bring stories of things like hearing racial slurs from members of the public, and support workers not working with them because of the color of their skin, being discriminated against because of their accent or because of the country of origin. And they can also bring stories about how things like racial stereotyping, how that negatively impacts disability diagnosis and prevents access to appropriate services. And this is something that people from different multicultural backgrounds, if they don't speak a certain language, they might have to wait a long time for their concerns to be diagnosed as a disability. And these are things that they're not just unique to multicultural backgrounds, they're also unique to women with disabilities. But as I mentioned before, this is compounded within the multicultural communities, and even more so for new and emerging communities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those perspectives are, particularly important for those who are encouraged to come forward when they know they're contributing to systemic change that will hopefully make things better, not only for themselves, but for others who've been through similar situations. Can you talk to us about how some people may be hindered when it comes to sharing their stories? What barriers do these communities face when they engage with the Royal Commission specifically?
I think before I mentioned that there might be a lack of confidence or trust in government or the public service. So how this translates to the Royal Commission is that there might be a fear of retaliation. People from CALD and multicultural backgrounds may be reluctant to make reports, get testimony to the Royal Commission, because they don't want to be seen as complaining, especially migrants who, they're coming, they might see Australia as the land of opportunity, so they don't want to complain. Or they're scared of retaliation. This goes back to that general barrier that I described. And it's with the Royal Commission and other, it could be other large systems like the education system and the health system. There's also the barrier of they may not have an awareness of what rights they're entitled to. People from multicultural backgrounds may not be aware of what constitutes discrimination, violence, abuse, and neglect. They may not also be aware of the rights they have to privacy and confidentiality when engaging with the Royal Commission, which you mentioned, Sifa, earlier. And as well, I think whenever someone wants to talk about the impacts of their disability to an external party, there's that fear, there's privacy concerns that some people in the CALD communities have, because they're reluctant to speak up if they haven't disclosed they have a disability, or that they're having trouble in some way, shape, or form and how they carry on with daily life. So they have a fear that what they share by people in the community, that their stories might be shared via people like support workers or via interpreters, when they haven't really shared that to their own community.
And I think we'll move on to a question about specifically how community workers, the role that they can play in supporting people from diverse cultures and linguistic backgrounds. But I suppose, the point that you are making about the lack of awareness of rights and their concerns around their privacy is significant, because that in itself can sometimes restrict people in wanting to come forward, because they're not feeling safe either within their family or within their community itself. And I think it is important for services like ours, the work that NIDA does, and certainly other community workers in playing a part in dispelling that. But I won't get ahead of myself, and I'll ask you the question to start off with, in terms of what role you see community workers playing to address some of these barriers and other challenges that people from multicultural backgrounds face.
I think community workers are, they're the, I always say this phrase, boots on ground, and that might not translate well to Australian audiences. So I'll say they have a more grassroots approach. They're there engaging with people day to day, and that have that unique perspective of knowing what issues are occurring as they're happening. So as an example, we had a project running with NEDA called the NDIS Community Connector Program. And the aim of that program was to connect community workers with people in the community to get them engaged with the NDIS. And although that program focused on the NDIS, what that did, there was significant work even before people can even understand what the NDIS was, that community workers were able to speak to. They were able to dispel those kinds of complex things that are happening within the education and health system. They were able to assist people in going to their GPs. They were able to assist people in understanding what disability is. And that program only lasted for a year, but I feel like that highlighted, and that program was very successful, and that really highlighted the important role community workers can have to assist people to have that sense of self-advocacy and have that capacity so that they can advocate for what their rights, what their rights are, and can also personally confront those barriers and be more involved with the Australian community just by understanding all these complex things that happen in the background before they can access services and supports. And also, I think community workers and individual advocacy organizations, they hold a lot of regular forums and workshops and webinars where they inform people of what's out there, where they inform people what sort of benefits there are, what sort of, and they engage more one-on-one with people than, someone like me I'm in an organization that's systemic advocacy. I don't necessarily interact with people day to day. So I rely on support community workers. I rely on individual advocates to inform what systemic issues are happening. So I'm really grateful, because that's the sort of experience that I don't necessarily have in this position that I'm in.
Yeah, the role of community workers, like you've said, as educators is really vital, particularly in this space where, just something like what disability means. I mean, with the Royal Commission, in a way, it's fortunate that the definition is so broad and all-encompassing, and you don't have to prove your disability. So that is in itself helpful. But of course, what you're saying about community workers being, I guess, the portal through which that information can filter through to people in the community that they work with on a day-to-day basis. And that's something we hear quite often when we are engaging with people from various communities, is really about making contacts with community workers who are there for the day-to-day, because they're the familiar faces. They're the ones who best understand ways to support people from the multicultural background. So I think that's a really helpful way of thinking about it. And to the wonderful community workers that I hope are tuning in today, in understanding that role doesn't need to be formalized in any way, and being part of the process to help empower and educate people, and so that services can partner with you to be able to make these processes accessible to people from culturally and linguistically diverse communities.
Yeah, definitely. And something that I just brought up in my head was a lot of times relationships are really important. And there are certain communities where there has to be a relationship for months and, an unknown amount of time and trust to work with someone. And so they might be reluctant to talk to a GP, but they're more comfortable talking to maybe a community worker who's been there. It's been building that relationship, and they feel safe that they can bring up issues that they're facing. Sifa, but I do have a question for you.
Okay.
How can your story support community workers and their clients to safely share stories with the Disability Royal Commission?
So your story can provide various options and choices for people with disability from multicultural communities, including around people writing or engaging with the Royal Commission in their own language, or by using interpreters. And our team is trauma-informed and flexible in how we provide our services. And we are really led by the individual. We respect that people from different come from different backgrounds, and we're respectful of how they want to go about sharing their story. We have translated resources in various languages that are available on our website in Arabic, Tagalog, Hindi, Mandarin, and Vietnamese. And we've actually also worked closely with NIDA on a glossary of terms about the Disability Royal Commission. That glossary simplifies some of the legal terminology used in the Royal Commission for people who speak languages other than English. It can be found on NIDA's website, and we'll have the details about that at the end of this webinar. The glossary is in 8 emerging languages, so targeted really at those new migrant communities, and include Burmese, Dari, Farsi, Swahili, and Tamil. For community workers, we can arrange group sessions for them or their clients to talk about how they can share their stories with the Royal Commission. So just recently, we've done this in partnership with the Regional Disability Advocacy Service in Wagga Wagga and Albury, where we met with Yazidi, Nepalese, and Congolese community groups just over morning tea and afternoon tea. And the environment was informal. We had casual conversations using interpreters. And I think people felt comfortable asking their questions in that environment, knowing they had interpreters that were familiar to them as part of the group. And of course, when you think of the issues faced by people with disability, the Royal Commission is not limited to what the Royal Commission is investigating. And in our service, we can link people with other support for legal issues and other support needs they might have. So I would say, we certainly welcome community workers and others to contact us to find out how we can support them. But now we can probably turn to questions from our audience. All right. Blanca, I think I have a question here for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. So the question is, someone in the audience is interested in hearing about the specific supports available to help prevent violence against women and refugee and migrant backgrounds with disabilities.
Yeah, so because NIDA, we're in systemic advocacy, we don't have specific supports that we can offer, but there are organizations such as like the Harmony Migration Alliance. They provide supports for migrant women. And there are other organizations such as Women with Disability Australia. That's a nationwide organization, but they have particular organizations in each state and territories. And they have a lot more information if you want specific supports in your state and territory. And then we also have different member organizations in different states and territories within Australia as well. So if you wanted links to those organizations, you can visit our website at NIDA, which we can post later on. But those different organizations range from either settlement organizations, or they're specific to called people with disability. And then within those organizations, they also have different initiatives to support women from multicultural backgrounds. So sorry, I can't give you any specific support right now, but that's something that we'll definitely have available on our website.
Thank you. The next question is for both of us, and I'll again let you have the first go. What are the strengths of multicultural communities for people with disability?
Oh, that's a very good question. And I really believe it's because of the different perspectives that we bring. And I count myself as a CALD woman with a disability. There are certain things that I've lived throughout my life that when I speak to people, it brings about things that they may have never considered. And, you know, we're not a minority. We're not just like 5% of Australians are, you know, multicultural. We're a significant percentage of the Australian population. And that's something that we can bring to the conversation. And it's our stories that bring that richness. We hear that Australia is a multicultural country, but we bring those experiences, those stories forward in hopes that that it does become multicultural and it is inclusive. Just for myself in particular, you know, I used to be in defense, and you know, most people didn't look like me. You know, we're male. You know, in different from mostly Anglo-Saxon backgrounds, and whenever I would speak about something, I would hope, and sometimes they did tell me out loud, but they said, oh, I never thought about it that way. Mm-hmm. So it kind of also questions in like, this is how we've always done things, but we can do it better. And that's not just unique to multicultural communities, it's with people with disabilities, it's within the LGBTIQ communities, it's women with disabilities, it's all these different communities that come together and can really highlight what us, you know, and I count myself as Australian, even though my citizenship appointment is next month.
Good luck.
Yeah, that we can, you know, really bring about when we talk about inclusiveness, and not just, you know, we see it on TV, or, you know, we eat, you know, tacos on Taco Tuesday. It's something that we really bring, that realities of what a multicultural Australia can look like. And in particular, people with disabilities, there are different accessible communication needs that they might have. You know, I don't require an Auslan interpreter, but now that, you know, when you're in these communities, when you know these issues, you would hope that when you interact with employment services, when you interact with the education system, that these things become a routine thing that gets asked, like, what sort of accessibility communications requirements do you have? Are there any language interpreter services that you require in order for you to engage in XYZ services? So I think that I find that as a strength, and I think some, you know, some people might see it as like, oh, great, we have to cater to someone new, we have to, you know, it's a burden, but it really is a strength, and it really will paint, you know, have Australia become a truly multicultural and inclusive country.
Yeah, I agree with all that you've said. And I think just picking up on, you know, that point about, you know, different accessibility needs as an example of a strength. I think one of the reasons that it is that way is because it, you know, allows people to learn. So, you know, you don't necessarily are in a position to accommodate everything from the beginning, but when you do learn about the different ways, you kind of adapt and try to be more flexible about the approach. And so I think the important thing from, you know, people with disability, particularly people with disability from multicultural backgrounds, is, you know, sometimes there is, you know, we will be the lesson for people to be able to pick up what needs to be improved. So really learning from experiences of people from multicultural backgrounds becomes important, because, you know, sometimes those issues haven't been haven't emerged from their perspective. And really, as being, the teller of your own story, there is that, powerful way of, saying, this is what applies to me, and this is the, support that I need for this reason. And having people looking at it and finding out and working with them to work out a way to address some of those issues that are raised. So I think, in the work that I do and my team does is, speaking to people about how they're empowering themselves by sharing that their story and experiences, but also what that teaches the rest of Australian society to be more multicultural and a better place really for people with disability from similar backgrounds as they come from. And so I think that really is an important aspect to be addressed in these types of forums. Okay, so the next question, someone in the audience is asking, they'd love to hear a little more about the best way to navigate not only the specific intersectional issues that arise for people from culturally and linguistically diverse communities with disability, but also the diversity within and across multicultural communities and different disabilities.
The best way to navigate. Oh, well, I think I'll just give an example that I discussed earlier was something like the Community Connectors program. That was a year-long program where community workers, like I discussed earlier, went through and worked one-on-one with individuals to kind of demystify, to disentangle a lot of things that are happening in major systems that impact people with disability. And I already forgot what I was going to say in the second part. But these are just projects that are funded for a year at a time. There might be some that are 2 or 3 years. What really needs to happen is that we need to see these types of programs become something long-term, become something that organizations are well funded to do. I think funding is a really big issue. We know we can talk about barriers, and we know what those barriers are, and and we want to do things to help and overcome, but without the resources, then that kind of, it's just relying on goodwill. So programs where it engages on multiple aspects of things like the health system, the education, the social services, can help navigate people through these very complex processes. And I don't even think I answered that question. See if you have any more ideas.
I probably wouldn't add too much to that, rather than, I guess, in terms of how that translates across communities. I think for me, what I would say is an important focus is that, there is a lot of diversity within, multicultural communities, and you can't have a, one size fits all approach. So it really is one of the points that you had raised earlier, Blanca, around, learning from people's individual experiences in terms of what works best for them. And I completely appreciate, when you're talking about, the funding and the limited resources, that it's not always possible to achieve, but as a starting point to a great extent in terms of, being able to recognize, the differences in diversity, and that goes across to, the different disabilities and approaches to communication as part of processes that, organizations and services need to take into account. Okay, there was a question about the impacts on people's temporary visas, which I understand to probably be a question around engaging with the Royal Commission and what that impact could be for anyone on temporary visas. So generally speaking, there are no restrictions in terms of who can share experiences with the Disability Royal Commission. And you can share your story if you are on a temporary visa, if you're not a citizen. It really is about, you know, the sharing experiences of any mistreatment as a person of disability. But of course, there could be some concerns that people have in terms of potential implications of doing so. And I know that a lot of people do have concerns about whether, you know, that needs to be done in an anonymous way or confidentially. And so at Your Story, we can give advice to individuals about their particular situations. And I would encourage anyone with similar questions or concerns to contact us for further information and advice around that. Next question. How do you envisage the Royal Commission bringing about tangible positive changes for women with disabilities from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds?
Yeah, and I think just, I guess, another prep is I don't think there's a lot of discussion in particular about women with disabilities from CALD backgrounds. Sometimes a lot of these intersectional lenses are painted as multicultural people, you know, and there are particular things that affect women or women or non-binary or girls that may not affect other people within the CALD community. And so without, I guess, before answering the questions, there are, for example, especially women on temporary visas or on partner visas may be reluctant to bring up something for fear of their visa being removed. I know that I came in on a partner visa, which is sponsored by my husband, and although, you know, I'm, you know, a woman with tertiary education, I'm financially stable, I still, in the back of my head, for some reason, and it has to be because of, you know, my mom's experience as well, I was a bit afraid, like, what if I do want to bring up something, you know, that might put my visa at risk. And for, you know, and for women from other CALD backgrounds, they might come from patriarchal societies where, you know, the man is the head of the household. So about bringing positive changes that the DRC can make. I know at the end, this is a long process, and there'll be recommendations being made to the Royal Commission, and that's going to be a lot further down the track. But for the immediate future, even just bringing these stories, having this being said to the wider community, hopefully triggers more initiatives by different organizations. It triggers like a real, to highlight the need about women from CALD backgrounds with disabilities and the sort of support services they need. So it's hard to know because we've seen with other Royal Commissions what happens with recommendations and how long it takes to implement them. But ideally, I would love to see a lot more tailored, specific organizations. You know, there's women's legal centers. There are, you know, like I mentioned, there's, you know, Women with Disability Australia. But what I would love to see is more tailored approach to culturally, linguistically diverse and multicultural backgrounds, women with disability.
And I think one way to do that, like you've mentioned, you know, the Royal Commission making its recommendations, and, you know, ideally government will be considering those recommendations and implementing those, whether it's through legislative or policy changes and systemic changes on a whole. And I think what, you know, is important is that, you know, those experiences coming directly from people and women from culturally and linguistically diverse communities it allows the Royal Commission to make informed recommendations based on their experiences. So it isn't just an academic exercise, but it is having heard the stories and heard the experiences, and having a diverse repertoire, I guess, of where their recommendations need to focus on because of the stories that have been shared. And so I think in a way, the Royal Commission recommendations set a benchmark for what needs to be changed, but what possible changes can be made in the future. I think we possibly have time for one more question. And there's one question around whether we allow time for clients to share their stories, because the questioner notes that it can take time to share, voice their experiences when there's been a history of shame and trauma related to living with disability, which I definitely acknowledge as something that we are quite mindful of at Your Story when we are working with clients who've experienced trauma, and we are mindful of working and supporting them in ways that suit them, including having multiple appointments if they need to be able to get the information, advice, and support that they need. So we do try to work with individuals in the way that works best for them, including allowing for sufficient time for them to do that. Thank you, everyone, for all your questions. I think there might be some that we haven't been able to answer today, which we will review and try to get to before, after this webinar. So thank you for sharing it. I would just like to start obviously by thanking you, Blanca, for joining us today, particularly at a bit of a short notice. We really have appreciated your time here. So that's really greatly appreciated. Just would like to remind everyone that there is free support available for people wanting to share their stories and ideas for change with the Disability Royal Commission. So we have our details up there on screen from Your Story. We'd also love to hear from you and ask if you can complete our survey by scanning the QR code or following the link that appears on screen at the end of this webinar. Recording of this webinar will be available on Your Story's YouTube channel, and it will be sent to all attendees after this webinar. You can also watch the Facebook live stream on NIDA and Your Story's Facebook pages. If this webinar has raised any concerns for you, free counseling is available. You may call Blue Knot on 1-800-421-468. Also, let you have NIDA's contact details. You can access their website, and there's information there, particularly focusing on people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. So thank you, everyone, for joining Blanca and me today, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.